So I'm Stan Stevens with the ICCA Consortium, and I'm also a faculty member in the geography program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the USA. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on unceded Haudenosaunee territory, and that I'd like to express my admiration and appreciation for their elders, past and present. And also, I'd like to say thank you to the many elders who are here in this room. This is a gathering which actually has an unusual number of elders, many of whom have come great distances to be here. I don't know, Torrey Strait probably set the record, but there are other people who have come from northern Quebec and the west coast of Canada, and so I really appreciate you being here and bringing your experience and your wisdom to this gathering. All right, so I want to introduce you to a situation which is extremely important to thousands of Indigenous peoples all over the world, which is both a tremendous challenge in many cases, but which can be an opportunity, and that is the overlap of national parks and other protected areas and Indigenous peoples and local communities' territories and their ICCAs. So, this arrow advances. Oh, yeah. All right, two maps. This shows you that overlap situations are very common in the world. On the left-hand side, a map of the protected areas of the world, now more than 230,000 of them. On the right-hand side, a first attempt from a couple years ago, may be problematic in some ways, but to show lands owned and or managed by Indigenous peoples, I think it's a tremendous underestimate actually. But what the analysis showed was that 20% of Indigenous peoples' territories are inside of protected areas, and from the standpoint of conservation, that 40% of the total area in terrestrial protected areas in the world consists of Indigenous peoples' territories. If you also take into account local communities collectively owned and stewarded territories, probably more than half of all the area and protected areas in the world is in the territories of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Many of these are ICCAs. So what are ICCAs? Well, ICCA originally was an acronym for Indigenous Peoples and Community Conserved Areas. More recently in IUCN and the CBD, the phrase territories and areas conserved by Indigenous peoples and local communities is in use. But when we think about ICCAs, we have to think about this as a general or umbrella term for a vast diversity of institutions and practices through which Indigenous peoples and local communities conserve and sustainably use their territories, lands, and waters through their ontologies, worldviews, values, collective governance and management, and cultural and livelihood practices. So conservation is also about livelihood and customary and sustainable use. So I'm going to share one overlap case with you. It's the one I know best. And I went to the Mount Everest region of Nepal 35 years ago to do research, and thought it would be a short-term commitment, and I engaged with the communities, and I've been an ally for 35 years, and it's been a big part of my life. I was taught about ICCAs by three elders, Kancha Chumbi, Sonam Hishi, and Tenzing Tashi Sherpa. This is Tenzing Tashi Sherpa here, showing his village, the largest Sherpa village. And I'd also like to thank the Sherpa leaders who approved me speaking about their ICCAs to you as part of their effort to reach out internationally for support and advocacy. So all of the Khumbu Sherpa territory is an ICCA. It's all a conserved territory. The farming, the yak herding, the forest use is all done on the basis of local knowledge and continues to be environmentally sensitive and sustainable. Moreover, the entire territory is a sacred place. It's a sacred valley, and according to Sherpa belief, no living thing should be killed within that territory, which means all wildlife is protected. But there are also many village ICCAs. Yeah, so there are community governed and managed commons like this rotational grazing system where the yaks are taken up and down the valley according to an ICCA governance and management. There are community forests, many of them. And there are many sacred places, sacred mountains, sacred lakes, sacred springs, sacred trees, sacred forests, sacred boulders, sacred places all over, including places like this one. This forest has been protected and cared for 500 years, and the rule is no tree should be cut in that particular forest. There are also indigenous protected areas, self-declared by Sherpas. This is a village where they decided that all that protection they already have for their territory wasn't enough because there are ground nesting pheasants, many of which are endangered species. And the village decided to protect an area for these birds where the surface should not be disturbed and none of the vegetation should be disturbed. So they self-dedicated this area and more or less closed it to grazing and other use. So the Sherpa people continue to maintain and care for these ICCAs through their ceremonies and through their institutions, including village guardians that rotates among households, and they involve young people in these institutions. So these are still alive and well. However, the problem is that none of these things are legal in the country of Nepal. And they're actively discouraged, and they're not recognized and respected within the national park. So the Sherpa people have been trying since the 1970s to gain recognition and respect for these ICCAs, and they have had very limited success. So one of the things that they decided to do a few years ago is to reach out internationally for support and advocacy in the hope that this would give them some more leverage within Nepal. And this is the reason why I joined with colleagues to establish the ICCA Consortium, was because of these situations and to support the Sherpa people in this effort. And one of the things that some of us in the ICCA Consortium have done is worked with IUCN to get this new policy adopted in 2016 in Hawaii, recognizing and respecting the territories and areas conserved by indigenous peoples and local communities, ICCAs, overlapped by protected areas. So IUCN is now recognizing this as something that they're committed to. The first operative paragraph, 1A, commits the Director General, the Council, the Commission, and members of IUCN together with the ICCA Consortium and other partners and ICCA Consortium members like CICADA to develop, disseminate, and urge implementation of best practice guidance on identifying, recognizing, respecting these overlapped ICCAs. So this is something we can work with. And guidance can take many forms for different audiences, and one of them is the development of best practice guidelines in the IUCN's own series of publications intended for protected area administrators and managers and protected area practitioners, including indigenous peoples and local community members. And so we are now developing this. IUCN commissions the ICCA Consortium. If you want to participate in this process, either talk to me here or send me a message at this email address. We are looking for case studies, and there are a number of them in this room, of good examples of indigenous protected areas and of protected areas that are not governed by indigenous peoples. They may have co-governance, they may be an indigenous vision, but the management is based on traditional practices and institutions in which the ICCAs are recognized and respected. We want those examples. We want to share them with the rest of the world. We want to give indigenous peoples in other parts of the world tools that they can use to talk to their governments about how things are being done differently in other parts of the world that could be done in our country. So thank you very much.